joined, I'll make sure that gets around. So thank you first for your time this afternoon. I guess it is afternoon there, right? My name is Ari Sowers with Respondus. My role here is pretty much doing things like we're going to do today, a training on how to use a couple of our applications to prevent cheating during online exams. So the way this will work is, I've got about 35 to 40 minutes of talking and showing off to do for you all. There's a couple of really natural parts where I'll pause and we can take some questions and have discussion. But usually we reserve a little bit of time at the end for Q&A as well. So don't feel free feel free to jump in with questions at any time, but also might be helpful to go through everything first and then discuss. So there's plenty of time for both. Also, I know if there's a group in the room, I think it sounds like you've muted yourselves so I don't hear any background noise. That's great. That'll help for those who want to watch the recording later. If you have any trouble with the audio or hearing, there's a chat feature in the little go-to meeting control panel. You're welcome to use that to get my attention. I will see it all the time except for when I'm actually using our applications as a student, because they don't let you use screen sharing tools, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So with that, I'll just jump in. We're going to cover, like I mentioned, a couple of applications from Respondus, both of which CSU East Bay licenses. You have Lockdown Browser first, which is the first tool that's part of the package here. Lockdown Browser is typically used in proctored testing environments to prevent digital cheating. And then Respondus Monitor, the second application, builds on Lockdown Browser. And even if you've used Lockdown Browser before, you're really familiar with it, that's why I cover it separately first. It's worth spending a little time going into some of the advanced settings and things like that. And then we'll add on Respondus Monitor to it and show you how that works. And that's the webcam feature that is used with Lockdown Browser in non-proctored environments. And throughout the whole session, I talk about some tips and best practices and ways for new faculty to get started, and of course, we'll answer questions. So starting with Lockdown Browser, as I mentioned, again, hold tight if you use it already. I probably learned something new. If you've never used it before, I'll make sure that we go through it very clearly. So even if you've never seen it before, you'll see it here today. Lockdown Browser, as I mentioned before, as a standalone application, is a browser. So the students will use Lockdown Browser to access their online tests. It is used as I mentioned before, mainly in proctored environments. That doesn't mean it can't be used remotely by itself, but its job is really to prevent cheating on the student's computer or device. And it's a tool within Blackboard, so we're going to see that in just a moment. But if you've never used Lockdown Browser, oops, sorry folks, there's a little bit of feedback. I'm going to make sure everybody's muted. Oh, thank you. And if you've never used Lockdown Browser before, when a student is taking a test with the browser, they're not going to be able to do a lot of things, but for a short, quick list, they can't print, capture screen content, so they can't share other test questions. They won't be able to go to other websites, open other parts of the Blackboard course, and they won't be able to access any other applications during an exam. Things like instant messaging programs, Word files, other browsers. So again, the idea is to keep them in the test so they can't digitally cheat. So what I'm going to do, and this is a pretty brief, this part, is just show you where the settings are for Lockdown Browser and how you would set up a test or quiz to require it. Then I'll take that test or quiz as a student so we can see exactly what the student perspective looks like, and then that's usually a good place to stop and take questions if anybody has any questions about the browser itself. So I am logged in to my Blackboard course. I'm an instructor in this course here. The very first thing from an instructor's perspective that you would do is probably what you're already doing. You would create your tests in Blackboard. So as a reminder, Lockdown Browser is just the browser. You're still giving your tests in your Blackboard course. So you'll create your test questions, any of the content in those questions, any of the settings for the exam, like time limits and availability and stuff like that. And then once the test is ready, you'll find something called the Lockdown Browser dashboard and apply the Lockdown Browser settings. So as you can see, I have a bunch of tests and quizzes and stuff in my course already. Where I want to look is in the Course Tools menu. You should find the Lockdown Browser link, and this is the dashboard that gives you all the Lockdown Browser settings. I'm going to make the screen a little bit bigger. Now I see that same list of tests and quizzes, again, that I've already created. I can pick and choose which ones I want to use both Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor with. I'm going to start with this week 5 quiz right here. So to change those settings, I open the menu next to it and I click Modify Settings. And there's the Lockdown Browser requirement. Now once I apply the Lockdown Browser requirement, more settings are revealed to me. I get an optional password setting. If I want to send students into a proctored environment, maybe like a testing center, if you choose to, you can apply a password to the test so the student cannot get in without somebody letting them in. That somebody is usually a proctor. But it's optional. You don't need to use it. Under advanced settings, and we'll talk about a few of these, we have the ability to first change the behavior of the browser if the student tries to exit the test before they've submitted it for grading. Now, I'm going to leave this setting off because I want to show you what it looks like by default. What happens when a student is in the middle of an exam and let's say there's an emergency or they need to leave or they lose power or internet connection and they can't finish the test, we allow them to safely close our browser, but not without explaining to you, the instructor, why they've left. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we take the test. However, if you do not want a student to close that test under any circumstances, you can check this box. Now, there is a note here built into the dashboard you can review that basically says, don't use this in a non-proctored environment. We strongly advise against that. And that's because if a student is on their own taking a test from home and something happens that's beyond their control, you're forcing them to really do a hard reboot to be able to close the browser, and we don't want that. So, you know, this option is generally for proctored environments. Along with checking this box, you can also add a second separate exit password to the test, and that way you can give that password again to a proctor who can let the student out of the exam if there was an emergency. Notice also with a lot of these settings there are links. Sometimes there's text in the link, sometimes there's a link to an article or guide about how to use this feature, so we try to build in some help into this dashboard itself. The second advanced setting allows students to use an iPad. So Lockdown Browser is supported on Windows and Mac computers. We also support iOS, iPads. This is an iPad app instead of a browser, and they would use that app to access their Blackboard courses and take the tests that way. Again, there's a little bit more information about how that works, but you know, just as a high level, know that the app is in the App Store and it's free. You just have to enable it if you want students to be able to use that type of tablet. We also have a feature here for students with visual impairments, and I know that there's some folks on the call interested in this specifically. This feature here says allow specific students to access this exam with a screen reader. Now, there's a couple qualifications for Damina, who's on the call, about how this works. Also, you can access this article, and I can send it to you separately, that has more detail. This is for Windows computers. On a Mac computer, the built-in screen reader tool, and I'm forgetting what it's called, VoiceOver, is enabled for students so they don't have to do anything. On a Windows computer, if you have students who normally would use something like Windows Eyes or NVDA or JAWS, the instructor would need to set that up with the student. Basically, they check this box, and then there's a change they need to make on the student's computer, and they can also identify the individual students who need this by their Blackboard username here, so it wouldn't open up the setting for everybody. That makes your very basic screen readers work. I know there are tons and tons of those applications out there. If this application is more than just a screen reader, it has a lot of other functionality, it may not work, so you'll want to either test it or work with our support team if you have one in mind. But basically that lets the screen reader run so the student can have the text read to them, because normally Lockdown Browser would block the use of other applications. There's also a calculator tool that can be enabled in the toolbar of Lockdown Browser. We have both a scientific and a standard version, so if you want students to be able to use a calculator but you don't want them bringing that device with them to the test environment, this will put the calculator in the browser itself, and I'll turn one on so we can see it. And at the very bottom, there's a print feature. Now, this is probably used like 0.0001% of the time. It is not a commonly used feature. Normally, Lockdown Browser blocks the use of printing. But if you had some reason, and there are schools that have these types of policies where you need the student to print out a copy of the test, maybe have a proctor sign it, that can be enabled, but again, pretty atypical. Now those are all the lockdown browser settings. Everything I just did here, if I were using Respondus Monitor, would also apply when I add the webcam setting. And this is where the Respondus Monitor webcam settings are. I'm going to come back to those in a moment because I want to take the test as a student just using the browser for now, so you can see what that looks like. We'll come back to these settings, open these up, and talk about those in more detail too. So I've saved and closed my lockdown browser setting. Here's my week 5 quiz. Now, this quiz now has the words requires lockdown browser added to the name of the quiz. So my students are going to see that in their courses when they log in. You can also see in this column here, it says required. Now, one other little best practice, little tip I like to share with instructors at this point is, I know this is probably very hard to read depending on how big the screen is that you're looking at, but there's a note down here at the bottom. In short, this note explains, once you've applied the lockdown browser setting to a test, if you go back into the Blackboard test settings and change a number of things, like the name of the exam or the password that's in the Blackboard settings, you actually will be breaking the lockdown browser connection with Blackboard. So what you want to do is make sure you set those things up first and apply the lockdown browser setting last. If you absolutely need to change those things, you can. But what you'll want to do is come back to this dashboard and make sure that this column still says required. If it says fix it, click the button and it will fix it for you. It's very simple to overcome. It's just a common confusion point, especially about the password. If you're going to password protect an exam that requires lockdown browser, make sure you're using the lockdown browser password that we saw here and leave the Blackboard password alone. All right, we have the test set up. It is ready for my students to take. It's going to require that they use lockdown browser. Now let's talk about what this looks like from the student's point of view. First of all, the student needs the browser. They're going to have lockdown browser installed to their computer or the iPad that they're going to use to take the test. There's a couple ways that can happen. They can install the browser themselves if they're using a personal computer. The way that works is every institution that licenses lockdown browser has a unique link or long URL that they will use to install their own version of the browser. So think of it as like every school has a custom version of lockdown browser. So the one that works for CSU East Bay does not work for any other institution and vice versa. And that means that the student has to get that link from someone at their school. They can't go to our website or ask us for it. They can't Google it. They have to get it from usually from their instructor. Sometimes schools will post that link in a student resource area, in the course, or in an announcement. It's really up to the institution or the individual instructors how you'd like to approach that. Just make it clear to students that if they're going to use their own computers, they need to follow your directions for installing the browser. And it's a one-time installation. It is not something they have to download every time they use it. They only need to do it once on the computer, of course. Now, if you're using lockdown browser in a testing center or a computer lab, the browser may need to be installed differently depending on how those computers are managed. Just know that you want your IT folks involved in that, or the people that manage those computers, because students likely can't do it themselves. The installation process is different, but the browser works exactly the same. And I just saw a quick question, aren't there updates to the browser? And the answer is yes. If the student has installed the browser to their own computer, it will automatically update itself when needed. The student can also do a manual update if they need to, but we do push out automatic updates very rarely, I'd say a couple times a year. On the lab computers, if it is a managed computer, that does need to be done by the school. And we usually, or the IT folks that manage those computers, and we usually recommend that be done once or twice a year. All right, so I'm going to now take this test as a student. You can see what this looks like. So what I need to do is get to my desktop because I already have lockdown browser installed. I won't bore you with how to install an application. Here's the browser shortcut. This is a Windows computer, so by default this little padlock icon will show up on my desktop. On a Mac it would be inside the applications folder, and on an iPad it's an app, so it's got its own icon. Now I'm going to open lockdown browser first. So I'm going to take a test in my Blackboard courses. Instead of opening Chrome or Safari or Firefox or another browser type, I'm opening lockdown browser. And the first thing I see, again as a student, is that Lockdown Browser is open full screen. You are seeing my whole desktop here. So you can't see those icons and application and folder shortcuts that I had on my desktop before. You also can't see the Start button down here, or the System Tray, or the Dock. All of those things are hidden by Lockdown Browser. And also notice in the upper right-hand corner, there's no Minimize or Resize buttons. So the student must be in full screen mode the entire time. One other thing I will mention here is if a student has dual monitors, so like I have a laptop screen and then I have a separate standalone monitor hooked up to my computer, one of those screens will be rendered useless. You cannot use two screens when you're using Lockdown Browser. The other thing you're seeing before Lockdown Browser loads is this little message that tells the student they might have another application running that they need to close before they take the test. So I left Skype running on purpose to show you what this looks like. I could have started a voice over IP phone call with a friend to be talking to them while I'm taking the test. Well, Lockdown Browser recognizes things like instant messaging, screen sharing, and screen capture applications, and requires the student close them before they can get to the test. Now what I'm seeing here is my login page for my online courses. So these are my online courses. This will obviously look like CSU East Bay's online courses. The student would log into their course the way they normally would, open the course itself, and in the content area I've posted that week 5 quiz. Notice it says requires Lockdown Browser in the name of the quiz. A couple other things before I open the quiz itself. I'll point out about the browser. You know, it kind of looks like a regular browser, but it's missing things like that file or edit help menu you might see up at the top. It's missing a web address field here, so I can't type in www.google.com. It also is missing the ability to use things like keyboard shortcuts, function keys, command keys, the right-click button on my mouse. All of those things have been disabled while I'm using Lockdown Browser, so I can't open other applications or files and basically cheat. There's also a button up here at the top called the Help Center, and this is a very useful tool, especially for first-time users of Lockdown Browser, students using their own computers. The Help Center has some system and network checks and a knowledge base and some troubleshooting tools for students to use. Particularly useful if they're not sure if their computer is too old or they're not sure if their internet connection is good enough. It will tell them if their computer is set up correctly for using Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor. In fact, there's a webcam check built in here specifically for that application. All right, let's open the quiz. I may have taken this one already. I did. I'm going to start another submission. So here's my quiz, and for those of you that already give tests in Blackboard, this should look pretty familiar. It's just a test in Blackboard. There's nothing different about the content, the settings. I have a time limit here. I have different test question types. I have, you know, my essay editor, word processing type folder features here. I can, you know, work with my text. I can include images, I could embed a PDF, I could include a media file if I wanted my students to review other resources during the test as a reference. In fact, I think the first question at the top here has a link to another page. And what's really great about this is if you wanted the student to view something, I actually just talked to an instructor earlier today who includes a link to a periodic table of elements because they want the student to reference it and then answer questions. Well, if you have a web page or a PDF or something with that information on it, you could link to that resource, but the student is not going to be able to go anywhere else. So notice none of these links or features are going to work when I click on them. And even if I try to go to another page or use search functionality, they will be blocked. So I can look at this nice pretty map and go back and answer the test question if that's what my instructor wants me to do. It keeps me in that secure browser, locked browser environment, but allows me to use other resources. I also mentioned that feature that we did not turn on in this example, but you could, that locks the student into the browser until they submit the test for grading. If I try to leave, I've left that setting alone, so this is the default behavior. Here's what happens. The student gets a warning that says, do not close the browser until the exam is complete. Your instructor will be notified. And if they say, nope, you know what, something's going on, I can't finish the test, you know, maybe the fire alarm went off or something like that, they can explain to their instructor why they didn't finish the exam and safely close the browser. And as instructors, you will see what the student wrote here in that dashboard in your course. So you'll see not only just your incomplete attempt in the Blackboard gradebook, but you'll also see what the student had to say by way of explanation. It will hold them accountable for this. Most commonly, I would say we see this used when things like the power goes out, you know, if there's a storm or whatever. Now, if I just want to return to the exam, I can, and I will. And I'm going to submit this for grading so we can finish this part. So now I've submitted the test. It's going to be graded. I can close the browser, and everything is running as it was before. So that might be a good time to stop and just see if there are any questions about Lockdown Browser by itself. You know, we'll get to the webcam feature in a moment. So feel free to unmute yourselves and shout out questions or use the chat feature. I'll give everybody a minute or two for that.
Problems on the Mac, sometimes loading the software. Now, if the student updated the versioning, then we're fine. Updated the version of what? The version of the student edition of Lockdown Browser. We had one student on a very old Mac computer, and it says, I think it's what, 7.0 and higher in Mac. And it was below that, it was an older. So it was incompatible with the software, with the operating system. So it was so old. The computer was old, and so that's why it was like, I think, wasn't it 7? So then what did they do? Use an older version of? They had to use a newer version. Older, oh, you had to update their operating system. They had, yes, they had to get a new, yeah. Okay. And the other one is the physical browser itself, because we moved to SAS, it had to be updated. So the Mac browser had to be updated to a newer version, which we did back in the summer, and it's been working fine.
And it pushes that stuff auto update when you use it for the first time. If not, you could go under About and then update it here.
Okay. So but you don't have any questions right now? The only thing is, can you show the people here how it works on an iPad? Is that possible?
Yeah, I could. If you just don't mind giving me a moment. I have some, I obviously can't share my iPad, or at least I haven't figured out how to do that on a PC yet. I know you can do it on a Mac, but I have some screenshots. In short, the way it works on an iPad is that first of all, the instructor needs to enable it. So we saw that in the advanced settings. Then the student would install the iPad app. Again, it's in the App Store. It's free. You could do it right now if you have an iPad and you want to poke around. They do a one-time setup where when they first open the iPad app, they are going to be asked to identify what school they're with. They can search by keyword or name. This is a one-time thing, just so we're pointing the student to the right Blackboard server, and then it will save that setting forever and ever. And then when the student goes to, and I'm just finding right now, just give me 1 second, some iPad screens. I think I have some here. Nope. I'm trying to find the Blackboard ones because, of course, we support 5 different learning management systems. Here we go. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so this is the iPad app icon. That's the home screen. Not very interesting. Once the student has done that one-time setup, and by the way, all the instructions for the student are built into the app, so they shouldn't need any other help. Just open the app and follow the directions. It uses a feature on the iPad called Guided Access. So they have to set up Guided Access, which actually is very easy. And again, the instructions, as you can see, are built in right here. So when they go to launch a test in Lockdown Browser, they're going to open the Lockdown Browser app, triple click so they go into Guided Access, and then they'll be pointed to the Blackboard login screen or login page for your institution, and then they'll go to the test. And it's pretty much the same. You know, it uses the browser-based version of Blackboard. It's not using the Blackboard app. That's sort of separate and not related to how Lockdown Browser works. So it will look like the browser-based version of the test, which generally speaking is I think 99% the same. So they would just take the test on the iPad, and then when they submit it for grading, oops, that's the Canvas screen, that's the Moodle screen, they'll get the finished, finished, press the home button to exit, And if you want to continue using it, you can triple click and go back into guided access. And if they need to take another test, they could do that. So it's a little different in the student experience, but there are prompts along the way to help them with that. Does that help? Or are there any other questions?
I've seen you actually have done a better job with showing about the directions in the app. It's been updated. But the key stumbling block that I see with students having issues is that getting that guided access set up properly. Once it is set up properly, it's smooth sailing after that. It's just,
yeah. And we continue to try to improve the embedded instructions for students because we know they have a tendency to not really read things very carefully. But if an instructor, if you have an abundance of students who would prefer to use their iPad, I would strongly suggest a practice quiz, and I'm going to talk about this at the very end and what this means for a course, and maybe they're already doing this. That practice quiz will give the student to do all this setup and just make sure that they're carefully reading those instructions. We actually have an article on our website in our knowledge base that I can send around that has instructions for students for the iPad app, and your instructors are welcome to copy that, edit it as they see fit, and use it if that will help.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, feel free to keep submitting questions. If you have more, of course, I'll be able to see them, and we'll continue on. So Lockdown Browser, we talked about, on its own does a great job of addressing digital cheating, but of course you're not always giving tests in proctored testing environments. So once you move away from that, there's two, and you've probably already thought of these things or experienced them. Lockdown Browser by itself will not stop students from using external resources, and it will not stop a student from having someone else take the test for them if they've shared their Blackboard login, for example. And that's where Respondus Monitor comes in. So now we can talk about the second application. Respondus Monitor builds on Lockdown Browser, so everything we just saw will still be true. About Respondus Monitor, we're just going to add a webcam. The webcam will record the student when they're taking the test, and by the way, I should have said it's the student's own webcam. We don't sell webcams, we don't make them, we don't care what kind they use as long as it works with the computer. And the iPad, it uses the camera that's already built in, so that's easy. It will record the student when they're taking a test, and the goal here really is to deter cheating, kind of in the same way that a police car on the side of the road on the highway makes people slow down, or the way a surveillance camera outside of a bank deters crime. This is going to deter students from cheating. They know they're being recorded. They'll also know that you have access to those videos. So instructors, if you want to, if you feel you need to, can review the video, and there's some other data that goes along with it. One of the newer pieces of information that we've added in the past year is flagging. So we have a feature that looks for suspicious behavior and draws your attention to it as a way to guide your review of the data and the video afterwards. And when I talk about Respondus Monitor and Lockdown Browser working together, I know I've said that a few times, but practically speaking, it means two things. You're going to use the same dashboard in the course to apply the Respondus Monitor settings. So if you know where that is already, we just saw it for Lockdown Browser. That's easy. And then students are still going to use Lockdown Browser. So if you're already familiar with it, if your students have been using it already, again, very easy to add the webcam part. It all works together. So I'm going to take a test with, I'm going to set up a test first. So it requires Respondus Monitor as well as Lockdown Browser. Then we'll look at the data in the video. I'll show you what that looks like. And then I'll take the test as a student, again, so we can see what that experience is for them. So I am going to, once again, go into my Blackboard course. Share my screen. There we go. I'll take that week 5 quiz. Here it is. I'm going to modify the settings. And I see the webcam settings under the Lockdown Browser settings. So if I turn off Lockdown Browser, I don't get to see the webcam settings. So you start by requiring Lockdown Browser. Then we can require Respondus Monitor. Now there's more stuff here to talk about. I can do two things with the webcam feature. I can either turn it on for everybody, or I can make it optional for my students. And this setting, which reads either Respondus Monitor or a proctored lab can be used, means that you can give your students a choice of going into that proctored environment, whether it be your classroom or the testing center or one-on-one with a hired proctor. They can take the test in that environment, and instead of using a webcam, there's a proctor there, but they're still using Lockdown Browser. Or they can take the test with the webcam and Lockdown Browser whenever, wherever they need to. And the way we ensure the involvement of a proctor is, as this note explains, we now, if you're using this optional setting, we now require a password for the test. So as an instructor, you would set up a password and give it to the proctor. That way you've got one test, two possible environments, and you're giving your students some choice. I'm going to keep it required across the board for today, just to keep things simple. I saw there was a question about the flagging, by the way. I'm not ignoring that. I will get to that when I show you the video review in just a moment. The startup sequence here, this list of items that you get to choose, some you can turn on and off if you'd like. These are items that the student goes through, sort of like a checklist, before they begin their exam. So we can do things like make sure they have a webcam that's plugged in. That's what the webcam check does. The webcam has to be working for them to be able to start the test. I'll take the test and show you the webcam check, so I won't go into too much detail here. The next item, student photo, allows you to require that the student take a picture of themselves. You might want to compare that to an official photo, or just as a way to confirm that the student is the person who enrolled in your program and not, someone else taking tests professionally or something. Show ID is similar. You can require that the student hold up a form of identification and take a picture of it. You might want to specify, you can edit these instructions, that they only use the school photo ID or government issued ID, something else that the school has set up as a policy. This can be customized. Environment check is the next step here, and what this does is have instructors require that students record their surroundings. Some instructors use this to have students show the desktop. I want to make sure that you don't have any notes or books or another computer out within arm's reach. Some instructors use this to make sure the student's alone in the room. I want to see 360 degrees around you. Some instructors don't use it at all. It's really up to you and the things that you're concerned about students doing during an exam. And you can edit these instructions too. And then lastly, there's something called additional instructions, which just gives you a place to put any other details before the exam begins. Remind them of the time limit, or if they're allowed scrap paper, or some instructors, and I love this idea, will put the honor code here or snippets from it because they want to remind students of what cheating is and what will happen if they get caught. And that by itself is a good deterrent. So we pick our settings, customize what we need to, save and close them, and now in this week 5 quiz says that it requires both Lockdown Browser and a webcam, so students will see that, and you also can see I set the settings up correctly here. So that test is ready to go. I'm going to take it in a minute. I want to talk about, since I'm here as an instructor, I want to show you the video review and the other pieces. So when your students have taken the exam with webcam and Lockdown Browser, you can come back to this same dashboard, and for this midterm, for example, I will see the option in this menu called, shockingly, Video Review. When I open that up, I get a list of all the students in my course, along with a lot of other data about the assessment session itself. I see the date and time they submitted the test, how long it took, and their grade. And these columns can be sorted. So, instructors with very large classes, might sort this information and only, spot check the top 10%, or look at a student who took the test in a particularly short or long period of time, something above or below normal. You also have a couple columns that give you some high-level information about the flagging feature that I mentioned earlier. The way our flags work, the flagging feature works, is it relies on facial detection. Is the student's face in the video? So if you have 100% facial detection percentage, that means the student is sitting facing the camera the whole time. If the student is allowed an open book, resources, or they're cheating because they're getting up and moving around, this column would be a little bit shorter. This column tells you the number of flagged events. There are 3 discrete events that we will identify and flag here. I will show you what each one of those are, but you can also sort this column. So if you wanted to see the student that had the most or the least, you could do that. And you also have a column here that tells you how long these flags took up. How much time in the entire assessment do these 5 flags occur for? And if you need to review an individual student, I've got 5 flags here. Let me see what was going on. I can expand her record, and then I'm going to see a lot more information about what the student was doing during this test. So up at the top, we have another reiteration of some of that flagging information: duration of exam, how long was the face detected. There's also a column here that says student facing their webcam. So again, it's one thing if they're sitting facing the webcam directly, it's another if they're turning their head side to side. If they're moving around a lot, this column will get shorter. Is that cheating? Not necessarily. We are not trying to tell you with this flagging information that yes, a student cheated. We are saying here's some abnormal behavior and you might want to look at it. It's entirely up to you, because certainly students can do innocent things, accidents, emergencies, that might trigger a flag. It's a guide. Think of it that way. I'm also going to explain in more detail what the flags are, but keep in mind, inside this dashboard, there's a link right here to a guide of exactly what all of these things mean. So I'm going to explain it now, but in 2 weeks you'll forget. I don't blame you. You can refer to this. So that page is linked right from this at the top and down here at the bottom. Now what else you're seeing on this page that's the video, so I can play the whole thing if I wanted to from right here. These pictures you're seeing over here are from the startup sequence, like the photo, the ID. We have the environment video here, where if you wanted the student to record their surroundings, you could watch that video. We also have a video that picks up where the environment video ends and goes until the student begins the exam. It's called the pre-exam video. This is continuous coverage of the student. We actually have, wanted to make sure that students weren't taking an environment video, stopping that video, and then saying, aha, now I'll take out my notes. They'll be on camera doing it. And then these are thumbnails. Now, I explain the thumbnails, and then I'm going to explain the flagged segments. They are not connected. The thumbnails are random snapshots taken at approximately a 1-minute interval, but not exactly, and not the same for every test, throughout the whole video. So if you have a 60-minute test, you're going to have 60 thumbnails, if that makes sense. So the thumbnails give you a way to quickly scan the video and say, all looks well, or if there's something suspicious going on, let me click on that thumbnail, and it will play the video at that point in time. The other way to do that, though, is to look at the actual flagged items, if there are any. So in this student's record, remember there were 5. Well, down here, under flag segments and warnings, we have those 5 flags listed. There are really only 3 types of flags in Respondus Monitor, and there's an example of each here. The first one is called multiple, and if you see this line here, this will tell you the time that the multiple flag began, 5 minutes and 46 seconds. It's clickable, so you can bring the video to that point there. It will tell you how long it lasted and the type of flag. And multiple, as you've probably figured out, means there are multiple faces in the video. That could be a student having somebody help them with the test. It could be an innocent interruption by a family member or roommate. That's up to you to decide, but it will flag it if we see 2 faces. Another type of flag down here is called different. And as again, you can probably figure that out. This means a different person is behind the camera than the person who started the test. And these 2 actually look very different. So it will flag it if someone else looks like they're taking the exam for the student. And then the last type of flag down here is called missing. And again, kind of self-explanatory. It means there's no face in the camera frame. This is the one where, did the student drop something? Did she have to get up to get a tissue to blow her nose? Like, innocent things can happen when you're taking exams at home, but it could also mean the student got up and started looking up answers offline and was cheating. Again, we want to give you a guide so you can review this information and decide for yourselves if you think the student cheated. Also, keep in mind that the student knows they're being recorded. So the whole time they're doing any of these things, the camera's running and they know it. And that usually deters the student from cheating. This is more typical of what you would see. Students sitting in the same place the whole time, looking at the screen, taking their test. And so it's very easy to just skip through the different students and see that these look more, average. You also can make notes if you need to. Put a note in this field, talk to the student about what happened at a certain point. You can mark a video as having been reviewed. These are things you can do so when you come back, if you come back later to look at these videos, you can quickly see which ones you've reviewed and which ones have notes with them. And I say when you come back because we store these videos for 5 years. So there's no rush to look at a video immediately following an exam. If, for example, you're really only keeping an eye on 1 or 2 students, and maybe you want to review all of their videos right before you award a final grade, that can be done. We also understand that, over time, a student might be caught up in some kind of dishonesty proceedings later on. They broke the honor code in another course or something, and you might need to go back and look at their whole academic record. We've kept these videos available. All right, so that is the video review. Let me make sure that I answer the question. Will there be more breaks in the video if there are more flags, or are the breaks timed? So I hope I explained that, but just to reiterate, the snapshots that you see are not actual breaks in the video. Let me go back to this. What they are snapshots. They're just an interval of time in which we pull out the picture of the video and put it here. The flags and those snapshots are not connected. So if you're seeing a flag, you can go to that point in time by clicking on this link here. So we don't create a snapshot when a flag happens, but we have this list here to draw you to the point at which that flag begins. This is to give you an overview of the entire assessment session. So you're not just looking at the flag segments, you're looking at all of it. So I hope that answered that question. This might be a good place to stop, though. Are there any other questions about the video review piece before I take the test?
Ari, we were wondering, does it record voice?
It does. It will record audio. So it doesn't flag on audio because it's only looking for the face, the facial detection part, but it will record ambient sound. And that's a good segue into my taking the test because you're going to see and hear that. Any other questions before I move on?
Nope, we're good.
Great. All right, so why don't I real briefly just take this test as a student. As a reminder, when a student is using Respondus Monitor, they're still going to use Lockdown Browser, and they need a webcam. And that webcam can be built into their computer. It will pick it up. It can be the kind they plug in. As long as it passes a webcam test, they'll be able to take the test with Respondus Monitor. So as a student, I would open Lockdown Browser first, kind of do the same thing we already did, which is log into my test. Log into my online courses first, then go to my course. Content area, week 5 quiz, says webcam in it. Now when I begin this submission of my exam, the first thing I'm going to see is not the test, it's the startup sequence in Respondus Monitor. So here are all those items that we selected as an instructor. They won't all be here if you don't use them all. The student agrees to a terms of use agreement, and then they do the webcam check. Hi. The webcam check, again, is what's making sure the student's webcam is plugged in, it's working, it's going to record me. So it's telling me to confirm that I see myself in the window, and then it's going to ask me to record a video. And notice up here, it tells the student to also speak during the recording because, as I just said, it's recording ambient sound as well as what you're seeing on the screen. So it's looking for a microphone that's turned on the computer. If there isn't one, it will prompt the student of how to turn it on or fix it. When it plays the video back, there's that audio piece. If anything goes wrong at this point, can't find the webcam, there's no internet access, it will tell the student, this is the issue, you need to fix it, you can't get into the test yet. And there's also some built-in troubleshooting. So if the student says, well, I couldn't hear myself, what do I do? Well, here's a list of possible suggestions to resolve the lack of sound. Usually it's the volume. Pretty simple. Once they finish and pass the webcam check, we move on to the next step, which is, in this case, student photo. So let's take a picture. Smile for the camera, like that. Then in this case, my instructor also wants me to show an ID. So I'm going to hold up my student ID card, and I'm going to take a picture of it. Move on. These go pretty fast, as you can see. Now we have that environment video that I mentioned earlier. So here's where if you wanted the student to do something like show you the whole room or the desktop, just write those instructions right here. And then the student would click Start Recording. And if they have a laptop or an iPad, they might be taking it, and tilting it like this as best they can. But if they have an external webcam, they can also take that and, do something like this. Well, here's my desktop, and it's pretty clean. The other side is really messy, so I'm not going to go over there, but I'm not really taking a test. I'll spare you. Then it will play that environment check back so the student can see the video, make sure they recorded it correctly. And when we move on to the next step, we're making sure that the student put their webcam back in the right place. I always do it a little funny. So we don't want to record a forehead in the ceiling. We want to make sure the webcam is still pointing right at the student. And then we move on to the additional instructions, and then we can begin the exam. One thing I'll point out right now, since I did an environment video, I am being recorded right now, even though I'm not in the exam. And this is that pre-exam video that I mentioned before, that continuous coverage of the student. Because at this point, it'd be very easy for me to take out my phone or put out some notes or my book so I could cheat. And the student knows they're being recorded with this little tiny recording icon at the top. And if there's a light on their camera, it would still be on. And you'll be able to see this video. But with that, we'll just begin the exam. It's going to look pretty much the same as the one we already took. So I won't spend a lot of time on how Lockdown Browser works. I'll just point out that that recording icon stays on throughout the entire exam. Once we submit the test for grading, it will go off. So let's just guess on these questions. Submit. And there goes that recording icon. So now the video is over. I'm no longer in the test. I can close Lockdown Browser, and I'm done. So with that, I'll briefly, talk about getting started. It sounds like some of you are familiar with Lockdown Browser already, but if you've never used it before and you're going to have students take tests remotely, they will need to install the browser to their own computers. The download link is unique to your institution. This is not it, but I wanted to show you what the page looks like that a student will see when they go to install the browser. So it will detect the right operating system, Windows or Mac. There's a great overview video for students right here. And then the installation, again, one-time process, and maybe takes about a minute and a half. Once that's done, they can take as many tests as they need to. It'll keep itself updated. They never need to install it again until they get a new computer. So I always suggest that instructors try it themselves. There's no harm. You have a license for both applications. You can take a little test in Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor so you can see what this looks like for you, figure out how it's going to work for you, because you have a lot of options and customization you can do. Everything from, do I want students to use an iPad, to which of the startup sequence items do I choose, and how do I write the instructions. Especially taking it yourself will inform those instructions. What do you want to tell students that they should be doing during or not doing during a test? And we have a lot of resources that can help with that. I'll make sure I send around a link to a page on our website that has things like guides and movies. One of the more useful things people have found is some sample language that goes in the syllabus or course. You can copy and edit it. It gives a great introduction to what the tool is and what students should do in preparation for a test. But I mentioned this once earlier, and I think it's important to repeat. I think the most important thing you can do to be successful and for your students to be successful is make sure they have a chance to practice. Set up a short practice quiz, something that isn't graded, a homework assignment, maybe a low point value in the beginning of the term, and make sure it requires Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor, because we want to make sure the student has an opportunity to set everything up, know what it looks and feels like to take a test with these tools before they take something that's graded and could be more stressful. This will get any of their questions out of the way. It gives you a chance to make sure they've recorded the video in the manner you want them to. Let's say they record their forehead the whole time. Well, you can tell them, hey, if you do that again, I'm going to make you take the test over. We don't want that. And it also gives them a chance to do any troubleshooting they might need to do, because that Help Center button that I pointed out earlier is available for them to do things like check their internet connection. So that's very useful. And that will make sure that they are comfortable and you're comfortable. So when it comes time for that real test, everybody will do wonderfully. So with that, I'll take any last questions. Also, throw up my email address. Feel free to take that down if you have questions that come to you after today. The other name on this screen is Nick Laboda. He is the account manager for California. He's also a wonderful resource. He and I have both worked at Respondus for very, very long time. So either one of us can answer any of your questions after today. But I'll take any more that you have right now.
One more question. It's about textbook publisher tests. Like we have integrations from Wiley Plus, Pearson, McGraw-Hill, Cengage. Those tests that they use inside, like let's say they have an access code, students take it and they upload it into Blackboard, but it doesn't touch the test pools or banks. Does that work? Can we enable it inside Respondus Lockdown Browser for those tests or not?
Well, the test has to be delivered by Blackboard in order for it to work with. We only integrate with the assessment tool in Blackboard. So if what you're doing, and I'm not sure I follow what you were describing, if what they're doing is copying or importing the test questions into Blackboard and then using the Blackboard assessment to deliver the test, then yes, it doesn't matter where the test questions came from. But if you're using a tool that belongs to the publisher or the student is taking the test on their platform, no, it doesn't work. We do have some third-party integrations with publishers. Pearson MyLabs is the one that comes to mind, but I know there are more, where the publisher has actually licensed our technology and the lockdown browser is a part of their tool or can be licensed from them. Nobody has Respondus Monitor, though, just us.
Okay. That's exactly what I was talking about. I knew it was,
Okay.
just didn't remember which one it was. So if you do that integration, it works for Pearson MyLab, I believe you just said, but the other textbook publishers it does not. So
But they need
Well, we have more than just the Pearson. Pearson MyLabs is just an example. I don't know the whole list off the top of my head, but what I'll do is I'll send you the page on our website that lists all of our third-party partners, and then you can reach out to them. And we love it when people really want it with the publishers because you tell the publisher, and then they'll come to us and say, can we have lockdown browser? And we'll make it work.
But they need a different lockdown browser version, right?
When I was looking at before, I think you click on it. Am I wrong? But
Because if
click
we
on
have a
link.
unique link for our Blackboard login, how does it work with the publisher?
Well, the publisher just log on to Blackboard and then it's integrated. So you, like I set up a homework, so click onto that, that goes to Wiley.
Right, right.
And
But
then
in this-
Wiley itself actually locked down. So they cannot go from that Wiley to another page of the, if they have the e-textbook, they cannot do that.
So is that the case?
No, just to clarify, if you're going to use our lockdown browser, you can only use it with the Blackboard test. Even if you're able to access the link, it's going to stop the student at some point because we do not allow the student to go to other websites and use them, even if your Wiley tool or whatever it is embedded in Blackboard. The publisher would have a different version of the browser. And I don't know how they all work. You'd have to talk to the publisher provider directly. I don't think Wiley is one of them, though. I can double check on that.
Wiley itself has its own lockdown browser.
So when the student downloads the lockdown